Good afternoon. The final session today is called the North Korea nuclear crisis. And I think despite some of the polling there, crisis is precisely the right word. It seems that a week or so doesn't go by without the regime in North Korea testing another missile, and Donald Trump responding with a threatening tweet. Sometimes it seems almost comical, but those of you who visited Washington will know that the talk of war, not just in the White House, but well beyond, is very serious. We have, I think, in North Korea now a regime that's made it very clear that it intends to be a nuclear power, and a nuclear power with a missile capable of hitting the United States and indeed Europe and other places. We have in the US an administration that says that this poses an unacceptable risk, not just to the security of not least South Korea and Japan, but the United States homeland. I think we also know from people in past administrations who've looked at so-called war plans that there isn't an easy military option. The options that the US has looked at involve the threat of very serious retaliation, tens of thousands perhaps of deaths. We know that neither China nor Russia want North Korea to have a nuclear weapon. Both countries have supported others in the United Nations Security Council more than a dozen times in terms of imposing sanctions. So no one has an interest. But we know too, I think, I may be corrected, that China is concerned not to apply so much pressure that the North Korean regime is toppled and that North Korea falls into chaos. These are some of the circles that have to be squared. We couldn't have had a better, more experienced panel to discuss them, to put the pieces together in a way that point to peace rather than war. I'm not going to read out their biographies. You can do that yourself, and we've only got an hour. I'm going to start instead with a direct question to Madame Fu Ying, and it's this. Donald Trump is now saying, Madame Fu Ying, that it's China's responsibility to solve this problem, that if we want to avoid war, China, as the biggest trading partner with North Korea, has to turn the screws, the trade screws, much more tightly so that the regime in Pyongyang changes its mind. Now, my question to you is twofold. One, do you think it's possible to change the mind of the regime in Pyongyang? And two, do you think deeper Chinese, stronger Chinese sanctions would actually do that?
China has faithfully implemented all the UN resolutions, especially in trade, because China is almost the main, if not the only, trading party with North Korea. Russia still has some trade, but China has had more trade with North Korea. So now we have cut down so much, especially the latest UN resolution has almost stopped our economic activities with North Korea. But the root cause of the issue is not trade, it's not business, it's security. It's a security dilemma. North Koreans feel that they are threatened by United States. So they think to get an ultimate means to protect themselves is to go nuclear. So cutting down trade is not linking directly with how they decide about their security relationship with the United States. And trying to franchise this difficult decision to China will only blur the situation and blur the vision of the US, I'm afraid, and will allow the situation to drift like it has been going on for almost a decade, drifting. So it's a tough decision for the United States, and they should not pretend that anybody else could take their responsibilities.
Okay. If I may just come back to you, if it's a question of security, and a lot of people would say that what the regime's doing is rational, maybe wrong-headed, but it's not irrational. If North Korea needs a security guarantee, why isn't that something that can be provided by China and signed off, if you like, by the United States?
That goes deeper. I think US believes in alignment, which is based on exclusive security, zero-sum security. That's not what China believes in. China does not want to see the world being divided again. And we don't think the US alignment system is in accordance with what the changes of the day. So I think it'd be wrong for China to go that kind of block, dividing the world again in security field. Besides, North Korea is a very small, weak, and poor country. And US, however difficult it is for the US to make a decision, to make a compromise, given the danger of the threat of the credibility of the international non-proliferation regime, and given the possible catastrophic results of a war, I think US should think about it worthwhile for them to make a tough decision and to make the compromise and find a way out, peaceful way out for this issue.
Thank you. Minister Morgulov, your president has said that the North Koreans would eat grass rather than give in to sanctions and stop the nuclear program. Did that imply that the Russian Federation now thinks that a nuclearized North Korea is inevitable, and we should be thinking perhaps of ways of containing, deterring, living with a nuclear North Korea rather than trying to roll back the nuclear program?
No, it doesn't. What my president meant is that the nuclear arsenal will be the last thing North Korean elite would reject. And that means that pressure only will not have effect, which all of us would like to have. We joined the sanctions approved by the United Nations Security Council, not for the first time. We did it many times together with other responsible members of international community. But we believe that sanctions only, this model, it's not working. And it will not lead us anywhere, just to the deadlock where we are now, which is very dangerous because, frankly speaking, we are on the brink of a real war. I personally do not believe that neither Washington nor Pyongyang want an all-out war. But still, there is such a scenario which we all should take into consideration. We believe that along with pressure, we also must give some incentives. And I'm not talking about material incentives to Pyongyang, because as you are well aware, negotiations with Pyongyang on nuclear issue is now being conducted for many years, 2 decades. And we discussed all options, including some bargaining, buying off these nuclear capabilities of Pyongyang. And it also didn't bring any positive effect. So the root cause of the problem is not material incentives, but what Madam Fu Ying just said, security guarantees. What Pyongyang is seeking is security guarantees. And I believe that we may collectively produce incentives in this area which may attract Pyongyang and lead to the resumption of negotiating process on security matters.
Okay, on that, I mean, what I think the Americans might say is that there have been previous agreements and the North Korean regime has consistently cheated in those agreements. And I think there's a fair amount of evidence. I think the UN has compiled some which would suggest that's true. But are you talking about, is your suggestion or your Russian Federation's suggestion the freeze for freeze? Is it, okay, we should ask the North Koreans to freeze their missile atomic program in return for a freeze of US exercises in the South?
Exactly. This is the phase one of the three-stage roadmap that Russia, together with China, is proposing for almost 6 months now. And the first step is so-called double freeze. We understand, and sometimes we are asked, how come you put on the same footing, on the same table, unlawful missile and nuclear activities by the DPRK and absolutely legal military exercises by the US and its allies in the region? And my answer is, I understand. Yes, it is absolutely clear for me that despite this difference, both DPRK's activity and US military activity, they both have an equally, and I stress this word, equally negative impact on the situation.
And do you have any reason to think that Kim Jong-un would accept that?
Let me tell you that Russia was, after putting forward this initiative of three-stage roadmap, we have discussed this step one, double freeze, with both Americans and North Koreans. And at some point, American representative at a working level said to us that if North Koreans would keep silent for at least 2 months, then America in return would decrease the level of its military activity. And we transmitted this message to Pyongyang, and it received, I would say cautious, but still interest on North Korean part. And to our greatest surprise, instead of, talking and keeping silent on both sides, we saw in November a series of new unplanned, unscheduled American exercises. 2 naval exercises with 3 air carriers group together, all together acting in the Pacific. Then now, yesterday, the new naval exercises started, unprecedented by this magnitude. First time since the end of the Korean War, 230 combat aircraft are participating in this exercise. So what would you expect, North Koreans, how do you expect the
I'm just trying to draw out your views.
Invitation to dialogue or what?
Well, perhaps,
so that's why after 75 days of silence, North Koreans responded with another missile launch on November 29th.
Professor Moon, I was in Seoul myself a month or so ago, and you realize just how close this is, and yet, sometimes we tend at events like this to talk over the Republic of Korea and talk about the international crisis, but for you, it's a national crisis. Your president put forward his proposals in Berlin here at the Körber Foundation. When you hear, for example, freeze for freeze or double freeze, if you want to call it that, as an initial starting point for what was an ambitious plan for eventual denuclearization, what do you think about that? What's the Republic of Korea view on this?
President Moon's personal view is this: it is inappropriate for North Korea to exchange North Korea's illegal activities for the legal activities by South Korea and the United States. Therefore, he strongly believes that the ROKS joint military exercise and training is a legitimate exercise. North Korea's test launching or missile test launching and underground nuclear testing is an illegal one. Right. However, he proposed two-stages approaches. First, North Korea got to freeze its activities, okay? And then second stage, all concerned parties can come up with some kinds of verifiable dismantling of nuclear facilities and nuclear materials in return for corresponding incentives, okay? He proposed that one. It's a much more realistic approach, but North Korea has not accepted it. But more than that, President Moon came to Berlin, and at this institute, he proposed that what he called the Berlin Initiative, okay? Yeah. We do not regard North Korea as a hostile entity. We do not seek regime change. We do not seek Korean unification in South Korean terms. We wanted to promote exchange and cooperation. He proposed to have Red Cross talks for humanitarian purposes. He proposed military talks to prevent accidental nuclear crash in the West Sea and along the DMZ. But North Korea has not responded. North Korean argument is very straightforward. South Korea has been taking sides with the United States. But we're simply complying with the United Nations Security Council resolutions.
But can you tell me, do you think in its heart the Republic of Korea government has now sort of internalized, as it were, what you hear a number of people say, that North Korea is determined to become a nuclear power, and that is it?
Yes, we know that. But however, we are determined to denuclearize North Korea. The whole point is this: North Korea has its goal of becoming, North Korea has an ambition to become a nuclear weapons state, and we are really committed to prevent it. Here comes the logic of engaging in dialogue and negotiation with North Korea.
When I was in the Republic, I noticed that the discussion about the Republic of Korea going nuclear, as it were, has stepped up somewhat in the last...
No, the President Moon made it very clear.
Not the President, but I'm talking about among politicians, among thinkers, that this discussion about, well, if North Korea does achieve this and the international community accepts it, then both the Republic of Korea and possibly Japan will begin to tilt in that direction. But you think that's not, that's not a fear that we should have?
A growing number of conservative people in South Korea argue that we should have independent nuclear weapons. If, because of NPT regime or American opposition, if we cannot have nuclear weapons, then let us allow redeployment of American tactical nuclear weapons in South Korea. However, there is a very clear commitment on the part of the United States to provide us with nuclear umbrella within the framework of extended deterrence. Therefore, we got to count on the United States. But now there is a growing debate in Washington about so-called decoupling. Okay? In other words, U.S. cannot give up its mainland because of South Korean security. Therefore, let us forget about South Korea. Let us withdraw American forces from South Korea in return for North Korea giving up its ICBM. I think it is very it's inappropriate and very, very lamentable in a way of thinking in the United States.
Okay, thank you. Roderich, Kiesewetter, Europe. When I go around and I talk to people in foreign ministries, they say two things. One, we mustn't have a war. And two, actually, probably Kim Jong-un is going to get this weapon, and we should really be thinking about deterrence, containment, and there's nothing much we can do. Is this a too cynical a reflection of Europe's role in this crisis?
Well, I don't think that this is a unanimous European attitude. We have also some countries in the European Union which are very close to Pyongyang, like Romania or Bulgaria. But on the other side, we can achieve something. We have to look in our own history. First of all, the behavior, the attitude of Pyongyang, I think, is not irrational, and it is also not incalculable. Because having in mind what has happened in 1994 in Ukraine, handing over the nuclear weapons to Russia, or what has happened in 2003 and 2011 in Iraq and Libya, leads a dictatorship, or could lead a dictatorship to the decision to become a little bit more independent, then it would be helpful. So, having said that, it was a surprise that we have perceived now a tremendous scientific and progress on the North Korean side, and we should take a closer look to those North Korea is aligned with. I don't speak about China or Russia, I speak about probably Pakistan and Iran. So we have to look for these alignments. Are there financial or other scientific relations? Yes, they are, but who can detect them? I think this is a task of the United Nations. We have to bring in much more the United Nations in that. And what we also need, I see it not helpful, the US-American rhetoric, and also not this exercise just starting now with more than 12,000 soldiers. This is a little bit a sign of escalation, and this is not helpful. We need to keep open all diplomatic channels. As regards Europe, we have no own interest in the region, but our European interest is that we have also in this region a rule-based international order, at least a way paved to this direction. And as I mentioned, we have to have a look into our past, in the European past. In the midterm, it might help to pursue an approach like we had in the Helsinki agreement in the 70s, and or in the strategic arms limitation talks between the Soviet Union and the United States in the 70s, where both sides have arranged an upper limit, and I think we should accept that North Korea will become a nuclear power. What we should not accept and what we should negotiate is that they create ICBMs. And there,
well, they're doing both.
European Union has a stake, as we could help to moderate the issue or to bring in our knowledge of moderation and negotiation.
But it seems, I mean, North Korea is doing both. It has a significant number of warheads already, and it's developing the missiles. But, I mean, Angela Merkel said a few months ago here, well, if there was a call for us to get involved, we'd be happy to. But it sounded a bit sort of like, well, if someone comes along and asks us, it didn't sound, I would have thought that Europe has an overriding interest in preventing further damage to the non-proliferation regime. Yeah. And it seems a bit reactive to say, well, look, if someone asks, we'll help. Yeah, well, we're not seeing Europeans come forward and saying, for example, why don't we try and do something like the Iran negotiations? You know, can we create new formats?
I think that the European Union is ready to assist in whatever format. However, it's a question of the region. It's a question of the arrangement, first of all, of the United States and China, and second, of South Korea with Japan. We need more of the Western countries or Western-minded countries in the region, a better narrative amongst South Korea and Japan, because Japan is also touched by the issue, or it is influenced and probably also threatened. And I see some stovepipes in the handling of South Korea and Japan. I think there is also something which we could mitigate a little bit.
Okay. Gearan has been following and writing about these issues for a very long time, close up and with great expertise. You know, sometimes I think in Europe this crisis is presented as Donald Trump's crisis. You know, it's his fault that he's... but my sense is that actually the concern, the deep concern, runs a lot broader than the Trump White House. Could you tell us, you know, where do you think the US is on this? And is it bluffing, I suppose, is the big question.
Well, thank you, Philip. I should say, first of all, unlike my esteemed colleagues who are here in their national capacities, I'm here as a reporter who covers the Trump administration, not as a defender or representative of the administration, sort of an interpreter, maybe. And to that end, certainly this crisis is actually not Donald Trump's fault. He inherited a crisis on the verge. And since he has been president, that crisis has come very, very close, very, very fast. Much faster, in fact, than the technical experts had predicted. But recall that in the car on the way from their first handshake at the White House to the inauguration at the US Capitol, Donald Trump rode with Barack Obama. And the thing that Barack Obama said to him on that car ride, which is about a mile, right, it's not very far, the thing that Obama wanted to impress on his successor in that very short car ride was that North Korea was a really, really, really big problem that was going to be fully his, Donald Trump's, to reckon with. And what Obama meant by that is that certainly within Trump's first term, and now it appears probably within Trump's first year in office, he would be confronted with the vectors that have been coming together for a long time, which, without getting too terribly technical on you, would give North Korea the three things it needs to threaten Washington, New York, Philadelphia, Miami, in addition to Los Angeles, of course, with a deliverable nuclear weapon. That he's on the verge, Kim is on the verge of doing that right now. We'll certainly have the technical ability to do it very soon. I personally think there's nothing that will stop him from gaining that technical ability, because once he has it, he has a much better bargaining chip than he has now. And so then you see the problem that will ensue for Trump at that point is there a deal that he can or would do? Is there a deal to be had? And is he willing to be a deal maker? And there, to your point about the mood in Washington, there is great concern among both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, as well as elsewhere in the administration. You hear it in some of the things that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson says, that Secretary of Defense James Mattis says. There is fear that there will not be time for negotiation because something, whether intentional or unintentional, will trigger a shooting war.
You don't detect differences in different parts of the administration. Some Europeans, for example, think that the White House with General McMaster is rather more, if you like, upfront and hawkish about this than the Pentagon with General Mattis. Are there those sorts of tensions? And some people are, so I'll ask you this question. Do you think the generals would actually allow the president to go for a preemptive or preventative war?
Well, certainly Mattis, who was a four-star general before he was Secretary of Defense, that's an unusual progression in the United States. It's very Trumpian, however. He is on record for years as saying that there's no winnable military war involving North Korea, that's the dumbest idea anybody's ever had, and that any smart military man would do anything in his power to prevent being faced with that eventuality. That said, he also says any war North Korea is foolish enough to start, the United States will win and win quickly. There'll just be a lot of dead people in the meantime. So I think he is, in his public expressions, if what he's telling Donald Trump is as clear and blunt as what he says in public, he certainly is giving Trump the message that, hey, slow your roll here. Like, you're actually potentially provoking the thing that you say you don't want. But the greater fear I hear, certainly in Congress, is that of miscalculation or misunderstanding. And that perhaps in the course of some of these exercises, that something will go awry or be misinterpreted, and then all of a sudden you have North Korea taking a shot, not a nuclear one, presumably, on first strike, but North Korea taking a shot that the United States would feel duty-bound to respond to. So there's very much a tinderbox sense. And then you also have Secretary of State Tillerson, whose own position may be tenuous, but he's also at this point acting as the foremost U.S. diplomat and doing the things that you would expect him to do in that capacity, which means that he basically ends every statement about North Korea with some kind of invitation toward negotiation or the beginnings of some discussion, if not actually a formal negotiation.
Okay. Just before I open up to the participants, I'm just going to just press Madam Fu Ying and Minister Morgulov about China and Russia again, because I just want to ask a sort of really naive question, which is, why isn't it that China and Russia jointly, separately, just guarantee the security of North Korea and get the US to agree to that? And I don't know, perhaps we'll hear that the US wouldn't, but I've heard nothing to suggest that the US wouldn't sign off on a non-nuclear North Korea with a security guarantee from Beijing and Moscow jointly. So why is it, if it's, as you said, Anna Fu Ying, essentially a matter of security, why isn't it that you can't go to Kim Jong-un and said, look, China, the great power China, will guarantee your security. You don't need this because you're under our nuclear umbrella. Why can't you do that and have the US say, yes, we agree? Sorry, it sounds like a naive question, but so the minister will tell me why I'm being so naive in a minute. He's looking forward to it. But
are you saying that why China is not behaving like the United States?
No.
Why China cannot become a superpower, forming a military alignment in the world?
No, I'm saying that you are a great power.
Countries together into blocks against another bloc.
No, you are a great, what I'm saying is China is a great power. It is that region's great power. It has a strong relationship with North Korea, stronger than anyone else. The history, I mean, North Korea is there because of the Korean War, and so why not? Why would anyone object to it? I'm not sure anyone in Europe would object if China said, here's a security guarantee to a non-nuclear North Korea.
I think you don't make mistakes, so correct mistakes. U.S. threatening North Korea is a mistake. After the Korean War, U.S. did not pull out and went into this animosity with North Korea. That's a mistake. And when you say military exercise is lawful, I feel I want to be more. The minister was a bit polite. I want to be more direct. It sounds like you are from the rich family, you own schools, so you make rules. Because the UN Charter has a clear clause saying that countries should not use or threat to use force against the other country's territorial integrity and political independence. If you have a military exercise in the middle of nowhere, that's fine. But if you do it constantly, continuously, at the doorstep of a smaller and weaker country, you should not staying blind about the threat effect over that country.
But you sound almost sympathetic.
So you are suggesting that China and Russia should go and do a similar military exercises at the doorstep of South Korea, right?
And South Korea will go to nuclear.
That's right. That's right. I think you should ask the U.S. to go the easier way, to stop threatening North Korea. Wouldn't that be better? Why should we all start threatening each other in order to balance the threat?
But let me tell you one thing. North Korea never trusts China and Russia, period.
Okay.
And the threat comes from U.S. and China and US cannot alleviate the threat from the US over North Korea. That's the problem.
Okay, Minister, you can now say
Let me also
why
try to answer your question. I think that what Pyongyang wants, not guarantees from us, from Russia, from China, but guarantees from the United States. They want to talk directly to the United States. And that is, by the way, step 2 of our roadmap, to start direct dialogue between US and DPRK, and also between two Koreas. I think this is important because there is a lot of mistrust in the region, and nobody trusts nobody. So we need to establish channels of communication, let US and DPRK talk directly. We are ready to provide some facilitation to this process. And if we are talking about security guarantees, there must be guarantees not only for DPRK or United States or South Korea. There must be a system of collective security, what our German friend mentioned, Helsinki process. We must create the similar process in the Northeast Asia region. And by the way, it is step 3 of our 3-stage roadmap.
Okay, well, thank you.
That's true, the peace accord.
Five great insights,
security
it's for you now to ask questions, make comments. I've seen this gentleman first, but rule is state your name, keep it very short and brisk. We'll take 3 or 4 and then come back to the panel.
Thank you so much, Alex Gabu with Carnegie Moscow Center. Just a very quick remark to your point on the 60 days of grace period.
70.
The Americans will throw back that you need to announce that, either public or communicate that to DC. You cannot sit quietly for 70 days and then launch a missile. That's what I hear in DC. Question to both you and Madam Fu Ying. Part of the implementation of the 3-stage plan, which sounds great and very constructive, and I don't think anybody has an alternative plan so far, which is constructive, is that you have very clear direct channels of communication to Pyongyang, and not to marquee mid-levels in the Pyongyang MFA, but to the top decision maker. China is obviously having problems with that. Whether Russia and China can send an envoy, and can you assure us, or do you have these channels or ability to open these channels to Kim Jong-un? Thank you so much.
Thank you. The gentleman in the second row there.
Yes, Sasha Hach from the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, and my question goes to Roderich Kiesewetter. First, I was very assured that of your very balanced analysis and comments. However, I see a slightly partisan position of the German government in this issue, because after the threat of Donald Trump in the face of the international community to eradicate North Korea, the German government has, of course, condemned both sides a little bit, but it has underlined that only one side has broken international public law. So it has taken a slightly partisan position. Given the fact that this conflict might escalate on a regional or even global level, I think this panel is very wisely chosen. What is your, or do you have an exit strategy from this slightly partisan position of the German government in case of escalation?
Okay, and then the gentleman just behind, no, yeah. Then I'm going to take this one, and then I'm going to come back to this side in a moment, so I haven't forgotten.
Torsten Menner with the Global Public Policy Institute. I have a question for you, Fu Ying. You talked about the security dilemma of North Korea, but I think China is also facing a security dilemma. If Donald Trump or the US doesn't agree to make this compromise that you suggest, there are 2 ways China is threatened. On the one hand, if you follow down the sanctions route with the US, North Korea may feel threatened and turn in a corner, and may also turn on China then, because China is the one cutting off vital goods for North Korea. And then the second dilemma is if you judge it likely that the US will take military action, that's of course a real security dilemma for China. That's why you're so afraid of this whole situation. So don't you think the best situation is for China to deploy, or to invite yourself to North Korea, deploy a sizable number of troops in North Korea to kind of freeze the situation?
And the gentleman right in the front row here. Actually, I'm going to take these two then as well. So that
this is Qasem Sajjadpur from Iran. Actually, I have a question on the linkage between the Korean file and JCPOA, the nuclear deal on Iran, in the American debates or in the Western debate. Is there any discussion that these two files may impact each other, taking into account that Trump's anti-JCPOA pronouncements have impaired, the spirit and the environment related to the JCPOA?
Okay, I'm going to take these. Actually, it was this one and this one. These two gentlemen. Yeah.
Go Myung-yeon from the Asan Institute for Policy Studies from Seoul, Korea. My question is to actually everybody in the panel. It's about the assumption about the fact that North Korea feels this hostile attitude from the United States, and that's the reason why North Korea is developing nuclear weapons. But my question to you all is that if North Korea feels so threatened by the United States, why would North Korea provoke the United States by developing ICBM, nuclear weapons, and so forth, and threaten the United States, for example, by targeting island of Guam and other places in East Asia? So why would North Korea be so paranoid and then drama queen about threatening the United States with nuclear weapons when that's my question.
Okay. And then this gentleman here, and then we're going to go back to the panel.
Jino Park, working at the South Korean National Assembly and Munich Young Leader. My question to Gearan. From U.S. observation, do you think how differently or similarly Korea and China approach to resolve North Korea's nuclear crisis?
Okay, what I'd like you to do is to take not all the questions, but take some, the ones that you think are most pertinent to you, and we'll run this way along. So, Professor.
In fact, I asked North Koreans, what do you mean by hostile intent and policy? And their answer is very simple and straightforward. Recognize us. Okay, we are concerned about protection of leader, institution, and people. Then how can U.S. to do that? Reduce sanctions, recognize us diplomatically, then we'll give up nuclear weapons, even at current stage. But then when I talk to the Americans, American answer is very simple. We never pose any hostile intent and policy in North Korea. North Koreans are contriving it, inventing it for domestic political purposes. Then there is a fundamental and perennial incompatibility problem between Washington and Pyongyang.
Okay, Mr. Kiesewetter.
I would like to take up the question of Sasha as regards a potential way out, or even not, if there is an escalation. Well, first of all, Germany has not followed the pressure coming from some parts of Washington to withdraw the ambassador. We can put everything on ice, but not to close diplomatic channels. But this is a short-term reaction. On the long term, it goes also with the question of Mr. Sajjadpur. We have to reconsider those international negotiations in the past who have been succeeded, at least temporarily, like the JCPOA or Helsinki. And I think we could drive a process like the E3+3, others call it P5+1, from the Security Council, encompassing regional powers like North Korea, South Korea, potentially also Japan. We need regional formats to mitigate the deficiencies of international presence in the region. So therefore we need the channels which are already existing. And from the European side, well, we cannot de-escalate and we cannot escalate. We should not overestimate our own position. What we can is to stand aside as a neutral arbitrator or as those who defend international law. And therefore, my last remark is, and not completely aligning with Minister Gabriel this morning, but in one context I could support him, this is the European Union has to define its interests. And not only to define these interests, but also to make them capable to be pursued. That means we need more diplomatic power, which is credible, and to bring credibility back to the international process. So the European Union as an anchor for the defense of international law or an law-based international system. This should be the way out.
Ying.
The relationship between China and North Korea, we have a borderline, common borderline, 1,300 kilometers. I've been there, and the river itself is the border. We could see the children from the North Korean side swimming in the river, women washing vegetables. So we're neighbors. Yes, we are doing sanctions, which is hurting North Korea. They are very unhappy, but we're not enemies because we're not threatening them. We're not doing those military exercises, so-called lawful, in front of that doorstep. So I don't think North Korea will turn around and start hitting China. There's no reason. The sanctions we are applying is in accordance with UN resolution, and the purpose we have, the purpose of sanction is not to bring down the regime, or we don't believe we have a right to decide what kind of a regime the other countries have. We don't believe in this regime change, or one country has a greater sovereignty over than the others. That's not our policy. We apply sanctions in order to push them to talks, but unfortunately, the talks have always been hanging there, although every UN resolution had a call for talks, for peace talks, but it's never being implemented. And talking about direct contact, I think at this moment, I would think US, North Koreans have probably the most direct contact. There's no question for them to talk with each other. The problem is the conditions. The Americans want to talk with them for denuclearization. It's like telling them, come and on your knees and we talk. This is not going to happen. It's not going to happen. So it's not a problem of a route of a channel of contact. It's whether you are willing to make the compromise for the contact.
Minister.
Yeah, I'm answering Alexander's question that we have our channels of dialogue open, and we are ready to use them and to use our influence on North Korea to deliver messages. But first, there must be conditions or must be environment created to send such a person or to transmit such a message. And let me tell you that these non-stop exercises is not that environment that is needed to communicate. And secondly, we must understand what kind of message we are sending to Kim Jong-un. If it's not a unilateral or united position of Russia, China, United States, other players, that it would be, a waste of time. And let me also respond to your 2 months remark. Yeah, it's right, but the idea was, in diplomacy, some things are made publicly and some are not. And there are a lot of things going on tacitly without public announcements. And especially in the East, where you have, problems of face saving and things like that. But again, conditions were not created for such announcement. And let me remind you that according to our plan, it should be bilateral announcement, not DPRK announce unilateral moratorium on nuclear and missile activities, but US also announce decision to scale down, not cancel, but scale down. We're not talking about canceling military exercises, but scaling down military exercises. It doesn't happen. And I also want to pick up question of our Korean friends asking why North Korea is so hostile. I don't believe that just North Korea is provoking the United States. I believe two sides are provoking each other. How can you assess these non-stop exercises, large scale, openly at North Korean borders, with some operations to seize North Korean territory, to eliminate its leadership, to destroy its vital infrastructure? What is it if not a hostile policy from the United States? So I'm not defending North Koreans, but what I'm trying to say that in my view, this situation is about two sides provoking each other. There are a lot of talking from North Korea, and for many years we got used to it, but it's absolutely new elements that we see recently, that President Trump from the high podium of United Nations General Assembly promised to destroy this country. Nikki Haley just a couple of days ago also repeated this. We all remember fire and fury. So what is this if not a hostile policy?
And Gearan.
Picking up on that just for a moment, certainly I don't mean to make light of the possibility of a real war here, but the rhetorical war that KCNA and as the official mouthpiece for the Kim regime and Donald Trump himself as his own official mouthpiece are already engaging in is really reaching new heights. We have KCNA to thank for reintroducing the word dotard into American English. This is a medieval term meaning old, senile, and feeble. Once we all had to look it up. They're like, did they misspell something? What is this? Did they mean like doddering? Did they mean retard? Actually, they meant both. There is a word that means both. So thank you to KCNA for that. There certainly is mutual provocation going on. And from the American perspective, the North Korean national narrative, which goes back 3 generations now of the Kim regime, that the United States sees North Korea as an existential threat and wants to wipe it off the map, has always been considered sort of funny and quaint and laughable, like, oh, that North Korea is elevating its own, elevating itself by saying that the United States is scared of it. But you go on a few decades of nuclear development, and all of a sudden that is actually true. And so the North Korean national narrative has actually come true in a way. And there is no equivalent US narrative. Most Americans could not explain in any coherent way what North Korea is and why it is the way it is. And there's been for years now, there's been an assumption that, well, China has the power to take care of it if they would only use that power. So there's sort of been a transference among a lot of Americans to the degree that they think about North Korea at all. There's been a transference to say, well, that's just a problem of China not doing what it's supposed to do. All of those things, I think, are being challenged now. And certainly to segue to your question about the US view of how China and the Republic of Korea deal with the situation differently, there's no static view of that under Donald Trump. I mean, remember, he campaigned saying, exactly that. China has the power to fix this, but they choose not to. I'm going to make them fix it. That was about as deep as it got. That has changed in office to where he sometimes says China should do more, but more often he praises President Xi as having a sage understanding of the situation and as having been willing to do much more than he had been before, for which Donald Trump takes credit. So that dynamic has changed considerably. Certainly there have been a couple of developments diplomatically. The UN sanctions to which the Deputy Foreign Minister referred, the U.S. was asking and for those 2 rounds of UN Security Council sanctions, which are much tougher than any that the Security Council has passed before. And the way that works is that the US and China actually work this stuff out behind the scenes at the UN, and then it's a sort of agreed how far China will go. And China has gone significantly farther, and Russia as well, toward that than in the last 8 months than they ever have before.
I haven't been told to shut this down, so I'm going to take the other two final ones. So this gentleman here and that one there, and then we're going to, I think you're all going to go and have something to eat, perhaps.
Thank you. Wang Yiwei from Renmin University of China. I have a question to Annie. Whether the United States accept nuclear Japan? Maybe not. But currently, the Japanese talk about they have the nuclear submarine. What's the U.S. position? Maybe also Professor Moon.
And then this gentleman here.
The director of the EU Asia Centre in Brussels. Now, having spent a week in North Korea earlier this year, I can confirm that the North Koreans dislike the Chinese equally, if not more than the Americans. I think there's zero chance of Kim Jong-un giving up his lifestyle, very luxurious, to send a rocket to America, knowing he'd be dead in 5 minutes. And is there not a much bigger danger of the tail wagging the dog here, that if Trump gets lured into further Mueller investigations, that he might see this as a way out? And to the panel as a whole, do you think that Kim Jong-un would react to the big invitation? Because Trump did talk about the deal in the campaign. So Trump actually invites Kim Jong-un to Washington, big deal based on the Iran deal, and of course Trump walks away with the Nobel Peace Prize and everyone is happy.
Okay, 1 minute each, starting with Ad and coming this way.
All right, so I don't know the answer on Japan. It's an intriguing question. Recall that during the campaign, Trump mused, apparently without knowing very much of the history involved, that perhaps it would be better if South Korea and Japan had their own nuclear weapons and paid for their own defense. And everyone went, oh my God, he just said that. It's actually a legitimate question to ask now, whether some difference in nuclear deployment, at least, might be in the offing. As to whether the administration might look even more like Game of Thrones or House of Cards than it already does, I've heard no suggestion from the White House or others that they want to be the architects of a grand deal. However, certainly the parallels to potential JCPOA are obvious. It would be an ultimate irony if Donald Trump, who also campaigned on loathing the Iran nuclear deal, ends up being the prime mover to make another international nuclear deal.
Minister.
Yeah, I think that Kim Jong-un is ready to talk. I still believe that what he is doing is a bizarre way to invite us, all of us, to dialogue. And that's maybe sounds strange, but still I think he's trying to raise stakes in this before this dialogue with us. So there is no real alternative to dialogue. So I think if such invitation would come to him, maybe meeting not bilaterally or in any other format, be 6-party or 4-party, 3-party, I don't know, but I think it is possible. Basically, I'm optimistic. I think that goals that we are creating a security system in the Northeast Asia they are quite achievable. What is needed and what is lacking today is political will on both sides. And of course, first steps to ease this military tension that we're witnessing right now. This is really important, and Russia stands ready to continue its effort in providing, every possible assistance in this respect.
Madam Fu Ying.
I think for the past decade, the situation has been drifting, and obviously, whatever policy was taken was wrong. It was not working. Pretending that other countries could solve the issue will only let the situation continue to drift. I think U.S., ROK, and American allies together should move out of this zero-sum security thinking and stop thinking for their own security only, and start to think, or kind of live and let live, develop that kind of approach, and try to think how to try to think if the other side also have the legitimate right to security, and see if there can be a sense of common security. Otherwise, I think it's very hard to see how we can change the direction of this tide. Then if US, if the other parties can take common security as the direction, it shouldn't be difficult to start think, oh, okay, North Korea is a equal partner in negotiations, should be respected, and then find a common ground to start the talks. Otherwise, this is really going in a very dangerous situation.
Thank you. Kiesewetter.
What is the main interest of North Korea, of Kim Jong-un? I think it's international respect and acceptance. It's the security of its country, and it is the heritage of his divine family, to keep this heritage. So he has no interest in unification, and I think he has no interest to be part of an international stage like you just proposed. I also think that neither the United States have an interest for that international stage. We need silent diplomacy, silent approaches, and then a kind of contract. I don't see it could be created a movie. This will not be part of the Nobel Prize, but it should also not be part of an Oscar movie.
And as to the Korea nuclear card as a nuclear Japan, because if we nuclearize, if Japan gets nuclearized, we do not listen to the United States, period.
Thank you. I'm not sure that I feel reassured, but I think it's been a really tremendous panel, and I think we've all been enlightened. So could we thank our panelists? And Madam Fu Ying, what's one final word?
Just before we end, because we are in Germany, which is allied with US, we're talking more about US, so we're pleading more to what US should do. But I think before we end, we should also call on the North Koreans to calm down and to give them a sense of a kind of the possibility of talking. There is a way out. I think North Korea should also grasp the opportunity, and they have a responsibility too, avoiding the issue going in a dangerous direction. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Brilliant. Thank you. That was really excellent. Thank you. That was great. Thank you. That was great.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated for another 2 minutes so that I can say a few words of final remarks and thanks. I would like to thank you all for coming to the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. It was great to have you here. Thanks for the good discussion, for your participation. Please spread the word of the forum, and in particular spread the word of the Pulse, the Berlin Pulse. I would like to thank the German Foreign Office, in particular Ralf Beste and Dieter Reinl and her teams for the good cooperation. I would like to thank our partners in the forum, the Carnegie Europe, European Council on Foreign Relations, the Hudson Institute, the Pew Research Center, and the Forum of Geopolitics of the University of Cambridge. I would like to thank the International Affairs team of Körber Foundation, led by Nora, in particular Liana Fix, who is the program director of the core team of the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum, and her team, Christoph Heilmeier, Anna Thewald, Jule Könnecke, Friederike von Bargen, and in particular Louise Fouquet, who is the editor of the Berlin Pulse. Thank you very much. Of course, there are some other people also who have contributed to the success of the forum, from Körber Foundation, but also from the Humboldt Carré here where we are, but also our translators and our technicians. Also, thank you very much. And last but not least, I would like to thank one person who has been the mastermind behind the Berlin Forum Policy Forum for the logistics and the organization for many years. And I would like to ask Julia to come to the stage, please. Ja, Applaus. Julia has been working for Körber Foundation for more than 10 years, yeah. And we have done some really interesting Bergedorf roundtables together, but you also worked in other projects, but the last years were dominated by the Berlin Foreign Policy Forum. I would like to thank you very much for your dedication and your commitment, for everything you did for Körber Foundation. Julia is leaving us to start a career in human resources. We'll miss you. Thank you very much.
Schöne Überraschung.
I see you all at 7:30 in the Austernbank restaurant. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.